Welcome to Command Control Power, a weekly podcast hosted by 3 certified members of the Apple Consultants Network, drawing from over half a century of combined experience. We talk shop, interview vendors and colleagues, and share what we've learned while operating our technology consulting practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com for show notes and click support to join our community for exclusive access to patron-only episodes, special features, merchandise, and other membership perks. This is Joe Saponari of CyMac, and my 2 co-hosts are Jerry Zigman of MacWorks and Sam Valencia of the HCS Technology Group. Thanks for listening. So picking up where we left off, now resuming our saga already in progress with my client. They've completed the move. That part went fine. We did handle that. Thankfully, they didn't hire some intern or just do it themselves or whatever. I mean, it was such a moving target. I had a client recently ask me about project-based or value-based billing, and I kind of went through this conversation with them comparing why we charge hourly versus taking that leap to value-based or project-based billing. My main point to this other client was you have to really front load a lot of the discovery and scoping. You have to very clearly scope everything. And that's kind of the downside, is that something might go sideways or something changes or comes up in the middle and you want to include that. And do you have to stop everything and go back to a updating of the proposal? I mean, it's just not the way we work, The Saga client that I've been talking about.
Now, let me just interject here to bring our listeners up to speed. If you've been following along with the show and listening regularly, this is the client that Joe had mentioned in the past where you spec'd out a Synology server for them because they've got lots of data. They ordered the parts and then they returned everything. And they're kind of going with somebody else from time to time. And he's now suggesting that they host their server on Dropbox. And you had said that it would cost you a tremendous amount of money to do that. But go ahead. You got to guys do what you got to do. That's the last time we left you on this.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry, for the recap. It's kind of one of these things where there's some cliches, give them enough rope to hang themselves. I don't think these are very pleasant sentiments, but letting them crash and burn, letting something blow up in their face. And then, these are all terrible sayings. I don't know why I'm invoking them, but I should probably purge them from my vocabulary. But, the idea is sometimes you just really try to help a client out and there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can say. There's just no talking to them, and they almost have to make their mistakes, and they have to learn it the hard way. And it's almost comical in this case, those examples you gave where, years ago, we spec'd a new Synology server for this client. And at that time, obviously, it was actually before COVID. Everybody was still working from the office. They were on premises and they had an on-premises server. And so we spec'd a new Synology for on-premises. And one of the other benefits besides being on-prem was the fact that they needed a lot of space and they had a certain number of users. So it just based on doing the math versus using cloud storage, having an on-premises server made a lot of sense. And even when things were fully remote, it still made sense to go on-premises based on the amount of space and everything. And so then, they went to this hybrid approach where they went to a cloud storage server system that's not a server that was recommended by an outside person. And that's where their primary data lives. And that's all finally kind of working for them. But then they still had this bulk older data that was still sitting on the old server. And so now we're kind of in this limbo state where we're maintaining the server for another season, another several months, half a year, with all their older historical data that they still need. And there's 5 or 6 users that needed access to that. Well, you still need a solution for this. So based on the amount of data and the number of users and so on, we would still recommend an on-premises server. Here we are, flashback to 3 years ago. So we're going to recommend a server. And hey, they said, well, what if we want to go back to an on-premises server for our main server? I'm in La La Land over here. This is an alternate universe. I don't know what's happening, but sure. Yeah. Let's talk about, I'm being punked. Exactly. Their cameras are going to come out of the, behind the scenes and, you and Sam are going to jump out and
we'll be
throw
laughing.
confetti, laughing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I'm okay, so you might go back to an on-premises server. Fine. Great. Okay. Let's talk about that again. How about we do this? I'm speccing you an on-premises archive repository, as I called it, an archive repository for all the historical data. Why don't I just spec it so that it can support becoming a server if and when, you decide to walk back down that other road. So I basically spec'd a Synology with enough capability, caching and memory and and just enough storage space because the archive was the vast majority of the space anyway. So it needed plenty of space. And then we included space, obviously, also for the live data and the changing data. So sent them that recommendation, and along with you need a battery backup that's rack mountable, you need a new equipment rack because you're moving offices, so all this stuff. And they just balked at everything, and meanwhile the move is approaching. So I'm following up, if you want us to do this move, we need a place to put the stuff. You've got patch panel mounted on the wall that's not even terminated, with cables going everywhere that somebody else did. We need you guys to follow through with this recommendation, or basically you can go in a different direction. Is kind of where we got to every step of the way. So they decided not to go with that archive repository server. They went with Dropbox, as you mentioned. They're going to be paying for a significant amount of storage because of the amount of data they have. So in the course of I think I calculated 2 or 3 years, the server hardware would have paid for itself versus what they're paying for Dropbox. But anyway, they're now going down that road of having the outside consultant, semi-consultant, day job person, who's moonlighting for them, pick up the server, bring it home, do the migration. So it's interesting to me how they're trying to save money. And I think that they just think that we are costing them a lot of money, and that if they just try to roll their own and do their own thing and push us a little harder or don't respond, or I don't know what it is, but they just think they're saving money, and they've ended up costing so much money, and by costing us time and also costing everyone aggravation. It's just clearly a mess. I mean, to the point where they were picking apart the move proposal. What is this equipment rack thing? Do we really need this? I'm like, do you want to just put everything in a pile on the floor? I don't care at this point. I'll just pile it on top of cardboard boxes. I don't care.
Cumberland Farms plastic crates, I'm thinking.
Find something. You make it up. Why don't you pick out the rack? What is this for, kind of thing? Well, now that we're not doing the server, do we still need this? So then I have to go back through. Let me see. Well, we've got 1U for the battery backup. We've got the gateway. It's 2U for the battery backup, 1U for the gateway, 1U for the switch. Need a shelf for the modem. I mean, I'm doing more work again to just reconfirm I'm not crazy. Yes, we do need the equipment rack. You're welcome.
And one FU for Joe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
Oh my God.
And so he took the old server home, and he's pushing it up to this cloud solution that he spec'd out.
They're pushing that stuff to Dropbox. So they already have the cloud. Wow. We don't call it a cloud server because it has no user management, no access control. So, it's cloud storage. It's just a big bucket in the cloud somewhere. I don't know if it's being backed up. Not my problem. I've logged that recommendation many times. Get that on record. But yeah, so that exists. That's for the primary data that all the users are working from on a daily basis. Then they have this archival data that's been sitting left behind on the old Mac server that we've been trying to replace for years now. And he now picked up that old server, I guess uploading it to Dropbox. Good luck. That's going to take a while also. We would have done all of this. That was all part of the spec, but they're, I guess, trying to save some money. So, and then eventually that'll probably have to be migrated back from Dropbox to some kind of, new on-premises server if and when they go that route. So it's been frustrating. I mean, then they're questioning, what is this battery thing? I'm like, you need a battery backup to protect the equipment. They declined the one. I had recommended a watt box so we could save an on-site if something goes wrong with, equipment, just power cycle things, whatever. Less of a need, without the on-premises server, I guess, because that component obviously is no longer self-hosted. So sure, we went for a standard battery backup. And then they're questioning, do we really need this? And it's every item that I sent you, yes, you do need it. This is not the time to have this conversation days before the move. This stuff's going to take a while to get here. So, and then after everything gets done, then they go back and they say, we were going through the old server and we have these old battery tower things. Why did we need a new one?
Why can't we use those?
Yeah, because those are old. And because they're not rack mounted, they're just kind of some prior person put them in. They're just sitting there next to the rack. I mean, it's just everything gets questioned. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, we've unpacked this on the other show, but it's that loss of trust. It comes back to that loss of trust. It's so interesting as you talk about this. I know this is a bigger client for you. I have a client that's much smaller in scope, but we did some of those very same things. They had a server and they were using a direct attached Thunderbolt RAID to serve their hot files per se. And we, several years ago, spec'd them out with a Synology to store their archival data. And it's a big amount of data. They've been kind of rolling right along and things went sideways where the Mac Mini server just failed it wouldn't stay booted. I think that the fan might have needed to be replaced. Yeah.
Yep.
But they didn't even want to explore that. They're like, well, we really need to move to the cloud. And I'm like, well, okay, here's some thoughts. Maybe we can get something used just to fix this flat tire and get you back on the road. And they said, well, can you talk to our head of creative? Okay, sure. So now I'm explaining technology to somebody who doesn't do that for a living per se.
Right.
He uses the Adobe Creative Suite.
Right.
That's about all this person knows. It's funny because, throughout the year, we'd get an email. Can you set up this user? Can you add them to they were using actually a Crush FTP web-based client instead of Rumpus, which is commonly used in a lot of our setups. But they were using this Crush FTP, and it works great. And I think that's a great product. So we'd add new users to Crush, and we'd terminate old employees and keep them from logging in. So we were just sort of happily rolling along. And it has been, I kid you not, radio silence for, I think, 90 days now.
Dead server, and they're not even...
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know what they're doing. It's not like they have 1 or 2 employees. They probably have 14 employees. They had always denied having us do any kind of managed service with them, with their workstations and time and materials. Something's wrong with this. You come over and figure it out for us. They potentially, in previous years, were a decent client in terms of billing, and they just disappeared. And I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to have that conversation,
Right.
Because I don't want to somehow prove myself again, even though we've had a relationship for 7 years. I've got to now deal with some creative guy. Right. No, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you have to keep proving yourself and keep earning their trust and re-earning their trust and just demonstrating more and more value. That clearly feels like the case with my client that I mentioned. And they became the perfect kind of counterpoint to value-based billing or project-based, where there has to be kind of a level of trust. Like, okay, we're making a leap of faith here that there are certain assumptions that are accurate based on things you've told us and just like certain timelines and things. I mean, all of that could be spelled out. Here's the kind of like context, and here's the timelines, and here's the outcomes and the deliverables, and here's certain objectives and things. But it could be spelled out very, very carefully, but there's always a certain element where there is a leap of faith. There's a little bit of trust that has to happen on both sides to embark on that kind of project. And if the client is trying to always get more from you, like it feels like with my client, plus things are always shifting, the ground is moving under your feet, that would be a really difficult thing to put into like a project-based scope, something value-based. Like, well, what's the move worth to you? You're saving $2,000 a month on your rent or something. So therefore, like the move is worth whatever, 20 something $1,000 per year. So like if I charge you 10,000, then that's the value. That's the fee. And I'll make sure you get moved between buildings, everything's included. I could do something like that, but I just feel like I'd be leaving myself, subject to their whims, and it would just be difficult. And it's tough. Like in your case too. I mean, you've been working with them for a while, and yet there still isn't this level of engagement from them to take your advice and move forward with it. And so now, now things are festering, and by the time they call you back, it's going to be worse for them and worse for you. Why do some clients work that way?
I have no idea. And we're managing a Ubiquity network for them, and the Synology server is still online, and we keep an eye on that, but they're not using that on a daily basis. It's just up there with archival files. I don't think they have all the credentials for all this stuff. So I don't know what's going on with this company.
It's so strange.
And yeah, and some might listen to this commentary and say, well, shame on me for not reaching out. But they know how to find me, Yeah. And they've never hesitated to reach out to me when employees come and go. So I just don't understand. I'm just totally confused. It's not like every time they pick up the phone, they're going to get a charge from me. I'm very liberal with a good, solid client that represents revenue stream on a recurring basis. Yeah. This is just no return at all. That's the thing, that I'm hearing from this client that you have is like, they don't even want to engage you at this point. Or if you engage them, then you're just jousting. Well, what about this? What about that? Do we need this?
Yeah.
It's really, really disheartening.
Yeah. Make good faith recommendations. This person needs a backup. This is happening. These updates need. And I just feel like everything I say to them is met with skepticism. I mean, it's not always the case, but that's what I'm beginning to expect from them now, based on just this past experience. And I had that with a new client too, actually, where they weren't happy with their current provider. Not anybody we know that, that we talk about regularly or that we have kind of on our radar. I mean, I've heard their name, and they do manage services. This client of mine, this potential client, they're, relatively small, a few people in the operation. They're kind of just getting started. They had this other company install like a router and I guess, manage some devices for them. I don't know, something about email hosting, maybe the phones, things like that. So it's still a little bit unclear exactly what this other company did and what's kind of an ongoing service. But they're coming to me feeling a little bit burned and feeling like the other company didn't have a level of attention to detail, messed up the spelling of their name or their company name, something like that in a few places, and then had to fix it. And this new client feels like they were paying for some of the fixes too, which was like not something of their causing. And so now I feel like I have to prove myself because this client has been burned by someone else. So I'm having to pay some of that cost that was incurred by the former company, really work extra hard to try to sell to this client. It doesn't feel like a good place to start from, because they're like, well, we're really skeptical. We don't want to pay anything monthly because like we feel burned by this other company. It's not a hard sell, but you really would benefit from that. You have these iPads that are used by different people, including people coming in from the outside. We want to manage them, enforce passcodes and probably guided access, or single app mode or something like that, where we can make sure people aren't using these iPads improperly. I mean, there's just one example. So there's a lot of reasons why like they would need an MDM solution. And, sure, we had this conversation. Sure, like you could do it yourself. I could train you. But it's not really efficient for a small company to pay me to train you to do your own IT. IT is always changing. So unless you like want a job in IT, it doesn't really pay for you to pay the learning cost. You're like, that's why you hire me,
Yeah.
So we're having this conversation from like the first call. It was like an hour-long phone call, and it was scheduled as this kind of thing that's an exploratory conversation, planned for 15 minutes. Like it's probably not going to be billable unless we tell you otherwise. So, I went into it knowing like, well, it might go longer. I could have jumped at any time, but I needed to really like get a full sense of it. I gave them kind of this soft sell. You could probably find someone for less money that could probably meet your needs. We don't compete on price. We compete on value. We try to show a much higher outcome for what you're paying for. And I'm not going to work extra hard to get their business now. My plan is to document the conversation from yesterday with some basic recommendations on ways we can get started together, like doing a specific project, like an email migration that allows us to do a little bit of a passive discovery process. And, we'll see if it's a good fit for some ongoing, monthly services and other things too. But it just felt like, wow, this is not even my client. And they're, I'm having to like really like win them over, it's like, I don't know if there's a lot of upside for it. So
yeah, I mean, sometimes those conversations are really worthwhile to have, even if you end up not charging them, because it gives you a feel for what they're all about. And for me and for you, obviously, they're red flags. I mean, that you're not even out of the gate. You're not even holding hands yet. They're telling you how bad things were in the other relationship. No, but I'm a good guy.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, well, that's not me. I'm not that other company. So. But I can understand they're skeptical now. So, someone's going to have to work a little harder to kind of like coddle them a little bit and make sure they're taken care of. It's the classic question of how much time is it worth putting in up front? How much time is it worth putting into a proposal or something like that? Because, if you're winning a new client, that client on a recurring basis could represent a really good ongoing revenue stream. Like what's the value of the client over the course of any given year on average? Or, especially if you sign them to one of your services, what's the value over the life of the client? What's the project? If the project is going to be 10 hours of billable time, assuming you're billing hourly, it might be worth putting in an hour or two up front to try to win the work. The maximum you're going to get out of it is 2 or 3 hours. It doesn't make sense to spend an hour up front for free just in case, because you're going to do that for probably 3 or 4 of those, and only one's going to come to pass, and you just wasted a lot of time. So yeah, it's a tough call to know without a time machine.
And it's hard to get a read on somebody if you're not visiting on site. If you did a visitation on site, even for just a meet and greet, you can get a real feel for the operation. Look around the room, what kind of equipment's there, not only computers, But what other things? What's the office like? Is the office messy? Is this a cobbled together organization? You could tell a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of times we can't do that on an exploratory call. You don't want to invest the time to go out there, see them, and do something like that. So darned if you do and darned if you don't.
Right. I had a little bit of experience with our new supporter, Kolide. You can find out more at kolide.com/CCP. We're very happy to have Kolide supporting us. I was very pleased to be able to explore it a little bit myself for a client where I knew I could say, hey, I want to try this thing out for my benefit, and I think this could be really beneficial for you. So let's look at it together. And I was very impressed with the sign-up process. First of all, there's a special surprise for our listeners. So I do encourage you to go to kolide.com/CCP. That's KOLIDE.com/CCP. and check it out for yourself. But the sign-up process itself was actually very slick. It was really well done. I really appreciated the attention to detail and the onboarding process there of how the sign-up went. There's a free 14-day trial. That's enough time to add your own device during sign up or add a test device during sign up, add a couple more devices and kind of adjust the settings and really get a feel for it. They do the communications with users through Slack. So for me, that was the subset of my users. And it really helps if the company that you're recommending for Kolide to be using Slack pretty widely across the board. And that's why, when I thought of this one company that I wanted to test it with, it made a lot of sense to me because I found out recently that they're all in on Slack. I mean, they're big fans of it. And I'm sure you have other companies in your portfolio that use Slack. Just keep that in mind that they'd be a really good fit for Kolide potentially.
I just want to interrupt here, Joe. What is Kolide? Well, Kolide is endpoint security. It integrates with Slack in a very unique way. And if that's an important part of your clients' organizations, this is a beautiful way for you to get people trained and educated and enlightened for security.
Exactly. From our perspective, as the person managing Kolide or, your client having their interface with Kolide to manage their own devices, it's very slick in its presentation. Information is presented in a really clear way. It's almost an upgraded version of Watchman Monitoring's interface. I like the simple recap of Watchman Monitoring. Think of the green check marks just taken to the next level. The benefit, again, is not only just like having the dashboard to show you what the status is and what to do about, fixing the security potential vectors and concerns. They communicate directly with your users through Kollide's automatic chat interface or bot interface. It will communicate with the endpoint users who can do something about, getting into compliance. So they'll be shown what's wrong. So for example, it'll tell them that the file vault is not turned on, and then it'll tell them how to do it. I really encourage people to check it out. I was very impressed to actually get my hands on the real interface and start the 14-day trial and just get some real benefit from it, like through making the systems more secure. I like the approach. I like that it's not a top-down enforced policy, but it's a way of engaging with users to help them understand why these things are important and make them feel empowered to actually do something about their own security and not block them from doing their work. So yeah, really interesting. Kolide.com/CCP, KOLIDE.com/CCP. One more thing on Kolide that I thought was kind of interesting was it was another good use case of, my Addigy chops, just trying to continue to get better at dealing with managing machines in Addigy more efficiently. At first, I looked in Addigy to see if there was a installer in the very vast public software catalog, but they didn't have the Kolide agent there. So, of course I could just install it on the machines I was testing with very, very easily. Right. But I thought, let me just see, this is another good example of if I want to just deploy this to all these machines in this organization, I can use Addigy for that. I built the installer in Addigy. I mean, it was really quick and easy. It gets a package file, as most things are. And, I just created the script to install it. It was just another win for Addigy to be able to go in there and deploy a brand new thing that I had never had any experience with. And I tested on my own machine first, which worked on the first try. I impressed myself. So I was very happy about the fact that, now I have a system set up where I can just, with one click, deploy the Kolide agent to a user's machine through Addigy. It was fantastic.
Now, you've taken the MDM Addigy training, as have I. Would you say building that package could be done without taking that training, or do you think you were in much better stead participating in the 3-day certification there?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. The information's out there. Addigy doesn't put it behind it like a paywall or anything. They don't make it hard to find. Right. You can simply go to Addigy's knowledge base and you can see the instructions. But clearly, taking the class completely up-leveled. I had never even tried doing something like that until I took the class because, the information's there. But am I going to really screw this up or am I going to struggle? Despite what I talk about on the show, I'm really not a good programmer or scripter or anything like that. And I don't have a ton of experience with I don't have any experience with like other MDM platforms really, other than very brief trials and tests. And so I don't have a lot of experience with this. So there's nothing like having, an actual course kind of lead you through it, exercises to go through. Like, they give you some files, take this file. Okay, here's a sample script, go to this screen, click here to upload the thing. Here's how to put the script in. It's like following along at home, to actually go through the steps that you would do to create your own custom software. And that was just one of the things we covered in the ACE course, Addigy's Certified Expert. There's a lot of stuff they cover. It's very, very valuable. I highly recommend it.
So I wanted to ask you, Joe, do you use either Square, SquareUp, the credit card swiper, or PayPal to invoice clients? I know for a fact that you don't use this for recurring charges, and neither does Sam. But do you have one-offs that you ever have to send via PayPal or SquareUp?
I have done that in the past, but we do that through our main system now, Repair Shopper. So we're able to just create an invoice for a client, and then they can pay online through a link there. It's not the simplest and cleanest thing. I think Square is probably way simpler from the client's perspective, just to get paid. But in the past, before we were putting everything through Repair Shopper, it was very convenient to be able to just like get a one-off credit card payment. I did do a few of those over the years in Square and other things too.
Well, if you're like me and you're not like Joe with the fancy pants system, and you got to do these from time to time, they're very easy to do. And that's not why I brought this up. There is an option, both with Square and with PayPal, to check off a checkbox to allow your client to add a tip.
Oh,
and
nice.
Well, I don't know. I wanted to ask you what your feelings would be on that. Would you check that box or would you not? I wanted to hear, what would Joe do?
So that's a great question. As a consumer, there's definitely cases where I look around and I say, this should not have a tip line. So in town here, there's a convenience store. And you walk in there, like if you need a toothbrush and you don't want to go to the grocery store or pharmacy, which, is a longer walk. You're walking home at night and you want to like pop in and grab some peanut butter cups or something like that,
I like where this is going.
Or like a kombucha or whatever, and the kombucha that costs $3.50 or $3 in the grocery store is like $5.50 at this place, or $6 or something. And the peanut butter cups are like $3 when, you get them from Whole Foods, it's like $1.25 or something, or $1.50. It's expensive as it is, and it's just very easy to walk out of there with 3 items and you're spending $10 or $15, very easily. When the screen comes up with their Square terminal and it has the tip option pop up at the retail point of sale, at that point, I'm like, no. Like, no, you're not getting any more money from me. And also, I happen to know like the owners often work. There's like, I think a whole bunch of owners, like 3, 4, 5 people that co-own the place. And a lot of times they're working there. So even more so, like I'm not, tipping some struggling, college kid or something like that. It's an owner and they're already getting profit. So I just feel like that's asking a little too much. And I kind of wish it didn't ask in that situation. Whereas at the coffee shop, I get a coffee. I mean, especially like during the last several years where those people are showing up for their jobs and, I'm just working from the comfort of my home. I really appreciated their efforts and stuff. So I always tip when it comes down to a coffee shop or a bar, restaurant kind of situation. So I guess it just depends on the context. That's a long way of saying that. But for our kind of service, I kind of feel like, well, if it's subtle enough on the invoice, people can just ignore it. And it hopefully doesn't bother too many people just to skip it. And every once in a while, maybe you get a tip.
As you were talking about the coffee shop getting the tip, this kind of set me in another direction for a moment. So typically you go into a coffee shop and they've got one of those Clover machines, right? And they process the order and then they flip the screen around to you. You know what really gets me, besides how did we do emails, is
right. Yeah.
When you have the option to add a tip, and I'm all for adding a tip, but the tips start at 15% for a cup of coffee. So for me, it's a little rough. I mean, obviously if the coffee's $2.50, in most cases I would probably throw in $1. But to start my tipping off at 15% and up from there, that kind of bothers me. That's a little too assuming.
Yeah, right. I get that, and at the same time, I get it from their perspective too. I don't think most people have a real problem with it where like they're not going to go into the store because they don't want to see 15% at the minimum. They'll just not respond or press no tip or whatever. So I feel like these stores and probably for the benefit of the employees, they think, well, overall, en masse, like this is really going to increase our tips. And I'm sure Square gives them data about that too. Like we suggest you change your tips to these levels because then, your average tip will become this. I bet they do that. It doesn't bother me that much. I look at like getting a cup of coffee from actual coffee shop as a luxury. If I'm able to afford a luxury like that, I can afford to help someone who's working there to provide me that luxury. So that's kind of the way I look at it, is just like it's a tax on the overall experience. If I want that experience to still exist, then I'm willing to throw in a little bit extra. I say it's probably not going to affect my like budget, but if I looked at how much I was spending on coffee and then I backed out of that how much my average tip probably is, I might be surprised at how much money I, give to random coffee shop employees on a regular basis.
And would you use the term luxury when referring to my local Dunkin' Donuts that has a sneeze guard by the register, like they normally have on a salad bar, and nobody's cleaned the sneeze guard in about 2 years since it went up at the beginning of COVID? I don't know how luxurious that might be. So,
well, I don't think you're prompted to tip. Are you prompted to tip?
No, you're not at Dunkin' Donuts. But sometimes, you get a sandwich or something like that, and you're looking at 15, or I'm just saying it's pretty presumptuous. So getting back to this whole thing about should you check that box off when you invoice your client, it's a tempting option. And my wife, who I ran this by, she said, oh no, that's completely unprofessional for you to do that. Interestingly enough, I had a one-off. I helped somebody remotely for 2 hours, 2 solid hours on the phone, and they paid full freight for our hourly rate. And so it was a pretty substantial invoice. And I checked off the tip box and I got a tip. I got a sizable tip.
Nice. Was it a percentage-based thing or did they put a dollar amount in? How'd that go?
Yeah, I think it was around 10%. This client was an academic and they were using a writing tool and they had transferred all their data over to an M1 Mac, and the company that makes the software is called Nota Bene. And the reason why you haven't heard of it, because most people who do writing and do bibliographies and that sort of thing on the Mac platform, one of the de facto programs to use is a program called Scrivener, which is very, very good. But this Nota Bene doesn't run on a Mac. So at first I looked at it and I'm like, how the hell are you doing this? How are you running this Windows-based program? Because she was having trouble finding her databases and loading files because it was referencing like C drives and Y drives. And she's like, I don't have a Y drive. Where's my Y drive? And I'm like, no. That's just like Windows paths. And it's okay. We'll figure it out. And I did sort it out for her, but she was running this program using Wine, which is a emulation tool. And so it works. It's a little dodgy, but because the M1 is so fast, it does perform, and she's able to limp along. Could you help me with the file organization of where these files need to be stored? It was a long, involved thing, but you're a real edge case. Nice. I don't mean that in a bad way. I said that's sort of a good way, but you're doing a lot of smoke and mirrors and a little bit of magic to actually make this happen. But it's working for you and you're familiar with it. Things really went sideways because you couldn't use parallels anymore, because that's how she was doing it before. And I said, we could use parallels, but that would require us reinstalling the program and downloading the parallels version that will work on an M1 machine. That would be several hours, for us to get you back on the road. So since this Wine thing is working, stay with it. And so she agreed to do that. And so I got her all squared away. And I said to her at the end of the phone call, I said, if you do need a little bit more support, I'll be here. Just give me a call. I'll spend a little bit more time with you. So she pays the invoice right away. I get this tip. About a day and a half later, she did need additional, can you reconnect and can you square away a couple of questions? And I ended up spending another hour with her, which I didn't charge her for.
What? You didn't charge her for it?
No.
It was all going smoothly until you said, and then I didn't charge her for it.
Go ahead, Joe. Beat me up.
As you're saying, I had the tip line in there and what the heck? And the person, sure enough, they give you a pretty decent tip.
You're punching the sky right now. Listening to the story.
I'm happy for you. I think it's great that, you get that recognition. And I think clearly the client is happy with your service and really appreciative. And they want to show it. That's what a tip is. It's like they're trying to send you a signal saying, I really appreciate your help, even more than the normal charge. Most clients are just, it's like all they can do to pay the normal rate. And that shows that they're happy enough as it is. But, if they want to go above and beyond, who am I to stop them? And in fact, I think it's good to allow clients to have a way to kind of express their thanks like that. I like the idea of it. I'm not sure I'd put it in like every invoice or something, but like these one-off ones or for a new client or something. Because I was given a tip, I think I might have mentioned on the show a little while back, which is interesting, running a company and being the owner and having somebody tipping me. It's interesting. It's like, did he know I was the owner? Because he might have thought I'm not some kid kind of thing. I think of it like if I had a college kid working for me, people assume like they need help. They could really use the money kind of thing. And they're probably not getting paid as much, but you're the owner. I'm the owner. Like we're getting paid what we're getting paid, So it's interesting to be tipped on top of that. And at the time, this was, I think, one of the first invoices with this new client of mine. I looked at it as a way when they said, in fact, I'm going to tack on this extra, on the invoice. I realized that they're basically letting me know that they really appreciate my help and maybe they would like to encourage me to give them slightly better help even. I think people think that they could get something from it. When I tip at the coffee shop, I'm like, I'm in here every week or a couple times a week or whatever it is. They probably recognize me. They might as well smile when they see me because they know they're going to get some kind of tip rather than I just say no every time, and then they might just not give me as good service because they have no incentive to necessarily. Of course, the argument could be made that like, well, it's your job. I mean, that's your incentive. You don't need any more incentive than that. But again, it's just, I think it's a philosophical thing where like some clients might want a way to make you happy when you think of them. Like next time they email you and say, hey, do you have any time? You might say, you know what, I'll make time because you took care of me last time. I'll take care of you this time.
I know you're going to yell at me for not charging for the extra hour, but that's how I felt about this new relationship with this client. I didn't see it as another source of recurring revenue, but I just had a good feeling. It just felt right to me.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to go by what feels right to you. So that's, I'm not trying to override that. I would say it looks like what was a tip, free and clear, this is your money, you deserve this, you helped me out, I really appreciate it, instead became a prepaid chunk of time, essentially. So now there's no tip. There was just like the prepayment for the work that you ended up doing, the second hour or the second.
So you say I'm losing money at this point?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you added it all up,
All right, make me feel bad.
I think that's a big win that they gave you a tip. And next time I think you should keep the tip and charge them, still charge them next time. The fact that you said, yeah, let me help you out. Let's put another date on the calendar. I think that's good enough that you might help them a little bit faster the next time, or you might go a little bit more out of your way. That's what the tip is for, not so that you waive it next time.
Point taken.
That's the tip. That's my tip for you.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarn.